Imagine your work laptop taking a photograph of your face, like every 10 minutes.
Right. Or your company chat software analyzing the exact emotional sentiment of your afternoon messages.
Yeah, just to predict if you're secretly thinking about quitting.
Which is terrifying.
It is. It sounds like a dystopian prison, right? Well, what if I told you that from a philosophical standpoint, those modern tools are actually the direct logical descendants of 18th century dungeons?
It's a wild thought, but it completely tracks.
Welcome to the deep dive. If you are listening to this, maybe you're a manager or an aspiring leader or, a management student just trying to figure out how to effectively navigate the modern workplace.
Yeah, and that workplace is getting really complicated.
Exactly. So our mission today is to pull back the curtain on the invisible architecture of power in our society and specifically inside our offices.
And we are bringing together three incredibly dense, really provocative sources to do this.
Right. First, we have excerpts from Michel Foucault's groundbreaking 1977 work, Discipline and Punish. Yeah, and we are pairing that with Byung-Chul Han's razor-sharp 2022 contemporary critique, Infocracy.
Which is just a brilliant update to Foucault.
It really is. And finally, we are tying it all together with a practical synthesis on Foucault's theories of power by researchers John Gaventa and Jethro Pettit.
It is a phenomenal stack of reading to work through. I mean, what we're really tracking here is an evolution of control.
Right.
We are essentially building a bridge from the soot-covered factories of the Industrial Revolution right up to the sleek, algorithmic smartphone era we all live in today.
And the core tension we are wrestling with is this. We naturally think of management as the noble art of leading people.
Like you read books on empathy and strategy.
Exactly. But what if the very tools we use every single day, from our annual performance reviews to our Slack channels, all the way down to those seemingly benevolent corporate wellness apps, what if they are actually just highly sophisticated evolutions of prison architecture and surveillance capitalism?
It is a deeply unsettling proposition.
Yeah, it really messes with your head.
But once we lay out the historical through line from Foucault to Hahn, you really cannot unsee the mechanisms operating in your own office.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand where management is going today with, predictive algorithms and artificial intelligence, we first have to understand where the concept of managing large groups of people even started.
Right, the origin story.
Yeah. And according to Foucault, it started with the intense, uncompromising physical control of the worker.
Exactly. Foucault looks back at the transition from classical sovereign societies into industrial capitalism, and he identifies the emergence of what he calls the disciplinary regime.
And it really helps to contrast this with what came before, right?
Yeah, definitely. Because before the industrial era, if you broke the rules, power was exercised through public, physical punishment. It was a spectacle.
Right, like the king bringing you to the town square.
Exactly. The sovereign, the king, would use violence to assert dominance. But as society industrialized and massive populations began moving into cities and factories, well, that kind of spectacular, sporadic violence just wasn't efficient anymore.
It doesn't scale. I mean, you can't run a profitable textile mill if you're constantly relying on spectacular punishment to keep people in line.
Precisely. Institutions, prisons, schools, hospitals, and factories, they needed a totally new kind of power.
Right.
They needed a reliable, scalable system that could extract maximum labor and utility from large groups of people. They needed what Foucault famously terms docile bodies.
And I have to admit, when I first read the phrase docile bodies in the text, it sounded like something out of a science fiction horror movie.
It does have that vibe, yeah.
But he's not talking about literal zombies. He's talking about everyday workers and students, right?
Very much so.
So let me see if I have the mechanism right here. A docile body is essentially a human being that has been broken down and rebuilt by an institution so that they don't resist the machinery around them.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. The explicit goal of the disciplinary regime was to create bodies that could be subjected, used, transformed, and improved.
So it's about making them useful.
Right. A docile body is one that absorbs the rules of the institution so deeply that it just works, efficiently and predictably, without needing constant physical coercion.
Wow.
And Foucault outlines the highly specific architecture of how institutions achieve this training, and it begins with what he calls the organization of genesis.
Organization of genesis, which is, a very academic way of saying the invention of the strict timetable.
Essentially, yes. It is the breaking down of a human's day into isolated, accessible sections of time.
Right, because before that, time was just time.
Exactly. Before this regime, people lived by the seasons or by the sun. The disciplinary regime introduces the clock. You divide time into rigid blocks, and you isolate the individual from everything else during that specific duration.
So the 9-to-5 workday, or like the school bell ringing every 45 minutes to signal a change of subject, the factory whistle.
All of those. By segmenting time, the institution can assess the body at the end of each block.
So they check your work constantly.
Right. Did you produce the required number of widgets in this hour? Did you master the math lesson before the bell rang? If you pass the assessment, you move to the next Genesis, the next block of time.
And if you fail?
If you fail, you are corrected. Once you have everyone running on these identical isolated timetables, you move to the next phase, which is the composition of forces.
Okay, let me try to map that onto a modern corporate equivalent. Because when I read Foucault's description of the composition of forces, which is bringing all these individually timed people together to form a single unit of machinery, my mind immediately went to a traditional corporate org chart.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly that translates. Walk me through how you see the org chart fitting into this.
Well, think about what an org chart actually is. You have this rigid, hierarchical, visual structure.
Right.
You have boxes connected by solid lines and dotted lines. It is fundamentally designed to take hundreds or thousands of messy, unpredictable humans and organize them so they function as predictable cogs in a massive machine.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
You have the vice president of logistics up here, and beneath them are regional directors, and beneath them are shift managers. The whole point of the composition of forces is that the machine keeps running to achieve a specific goal, even if you pull one human cog out and slot a new one in.
That is a brilliant application of the text. Foucault's point is that the institution manipulates the entire composed unit under a specific command.
So it's not just about the individual anymore.
Exactly. The power doesn't just act on one person, it acts on the relationships between them. And to illustrate this, Foucault uses some incredibly vivid historical examples that ground this abstract philosophy in reality.
Yeah, I noticed that.
He talks at length about the military and the soldier.
Yeah, I saw that section. He mentions that the military doesn't just hand a guy a musket and say, hey, go shoot the enemy. The training is microscopic.
Microscopic is the exact word. They train the soldier to bring the rifle forward in a highly measured, calculated step-by-step sequence.
Like a dance.
Right? Raise the arm at a specific angle. Grip the barrel with specific fingers. No part of the body can be idle. Every single interaction with the object is regulated by a strict standard.
Wow.
The body and the weapon become one continuous machine.
And I notice he uses the example of orphans as well. I mean, I get the military aspect, but how does an orphanage fit into this early blueprint of management?
In the 19th century orphanage, much like the factory, the challenge was dealing with a massive influx of bodies that needed to be categorized and managed cheaply.
So they needed a system.
Yeah. So the children face morning assessments where every single movement, how they fold their blankets, how they stand by their beds, how they march to the dining hall, is judged against a rigid standard.
And if they mess up, they stand out.
Exactly. Any deviation is immediately visible. But perhaps his most universal example, the one literally everyone listening has experienced, is the traditional school classroom.
Oh, the rows of desks.
Exactly. Why are students confined to a single room, placed in individual wooden desks, and arranged in perfect, rigid rows facing the front?
Right. It isn't because that is the most natural way for humans to learn.
Not at all. It is because that spatial delineation separates the subjects. It prevents them from forming unmonitored connections. It makes them infinitely easier to observe, categorize, and control.
So it's an architecture of control.
Yes. And this spatial design sets the stage for Foucault's three core mechanisms of disciplinary training. Those are hierarchical observation, normalizing judgment, and examination.
This is where I want to slow down, because for the managers and business students listening, this triad feels like the absolute fundamental blueprint for corporate management.
It really is the foundation.
If we break these down, it starts to look very familiar. Let's start with hierarchical observation. To discipline a worker, you have to be able to see them.
Correct. Visibility is a trap, in Foucault's view. But as institutions grew massive, think of a factory floor with 1,000 looming machines, or a school with 2,000 students. Well, One sovereign leader couldn't physically see everything anymore.
Right, so they create a hierarchy of observers.
Exactly.
The text mentions a teacher appointing hall monitors or prefects. In our factory example, you can't just have the factory owner. You need the floor manager, and beneath them the shift supervisor, and beneath them the line boss.
And this creates a continuous, unbroken gaze. Power functions like a piece of machinery that relays observation from the bottom all the way to the top.
It's just eyes everywhere.
Yes, and
Yeah.
once you have this network of observation in place, you apply the second mechanism, which is normalizing judgment.
This was the part that really clicked for me regarding modern workplace culture. Training requires that subjects submit to constant behavioral judgment.
Right.
But they aren't being judged against, like, some universal moral truth, are they?
No, and that is a crucial distinction. They are being judged against the norm, with a capital N.
The norm.
The norm is just an accepted standard of behavior developed by that specific society or institution. In a school, the norm is sitting quietly and raising your hand to speak.
Right.
In a factory, the norm is producing 20 units an hour. If a subject fails to comply with the norm, they are punished, but not through spectacular violence. They are punished through micro-penalties.
Micro-penalties like being written up by HR or
Yeah.
getting a needs improvement rating on a specific competency.
Exactly.
The punishment is designed to correct the behavior and bring you back to the norm, not to destroy you.
Exactly. The goal of normalizing judgment is homogenization. It wants everyone to be the same, to be predictable.
Right, but there's a catch there, isn't there?
There is. Paradoxically, by measuring everyone against the same standard, it also individualizes them. It highlights exactly how and where John deviates from Jane.
Wow, so it makes you a data point.
Yes. And the ultimate tool that combines hierarchical observation and normalizing judgment into one perfect package is the third mechanism, the examination.
Which, reading this text, I couldn't help but laugh because the examination is literally just a 19th century academic term for the annual corporate performance review.
It is the exact same mechanism. The examination is a highly ritualized deployment of power. It makes the individual hyper-visible.
Yeah.
Think about a performance review. It's a careful, documented record of your abilities, your adherence to company culture, your productivity metrics over 12 months. It is all quantified.
And here's the critical shift Foucault identifies that I thought was fascinating. Through the examination, the subject, the employee, becomes highly visible and documented.
Right.
But the observer, the management, the institutional power fades into concealment.
Yes, exactly.
The manager grading you isn't the one being documented. They are just the invisible hand applying the norm.
If we look back at the early 20th century, we see the absolute peak of this disciplinary regime in the workplace through Taylorism.
Oh, Frederick Taylor.
Right. Frederick Winslow Taylor was a management consultant who was obsessed with measuring every second of a worker's day with a literal stopwatch.
Just standing there ticking away.
Yeah, he would stand behind a guy shoveling coal and document the exact angle of the shovel, the weight of the coal, the seconds between scoops, all just to find the single most efficient method.
That is the ultimate observation of the docile body to extract maximum energy.
It is.
But obviously, as companies scale globally, having a manager standing over every single employee with a stopwatch is insanely expensive. It's a logistical nightmare.
Which leads us to the next massive architectural evolution of power. If physical training and constant direct observation was step one, step two was making that control self-sustaining.
Right.
The institution needed a way for the discipline to function on autopilot without needing a manager in the room at all times.
And that transition brings us to the panopticon. I have to say, this is honestly one of the most famous and frankly most chilling concepts in all of sociology.
It really is. The panopticon was a theoretical prison design conceived by the English philosopher Jeremy Bentham in the late 18th century.
So Foucault didn't invent it.
No, but Foucault adopts Bentham's architectural blueprints and uses them as the perfect enduring metaphor for modern power. To understand how it works, we have to visualize the space.
Okay, let's set the scene for the listener. Imagine a massive circular building, a giant ring.
Okay.
Inside the ring is a wide-open courtyard, and right in the dead center of that courtyard stands a single tall watchtower. The outer ring of the building is divided up into hundreds of individual cells.
And here's the architectural trick. Each cell spans the entire depth of the building.
Right.
There is a window on the outside wall of the cell to let the sunlight in, and there is a window on the inside wall facing the central tower.
So from the guard's perspective in the central tower, Every single prisoner in every single cell is entirely backlit by the sun.
Yes.
The guard can see their silhouette perfectly. There are no shadows to hide in.
Complete illumination. But here is the genius and the psychological terror of Bentham's design. The large windows of the central watchtower are fitted with angled blinds or tinted glass. The inmates sitting in those backlit cells can look out, but they can never see into the tower.
So the prisoner knows the guard might be watching them at any given second, but they can never, ever verify it.
Exact.
The tower could be completely empty, and the prisoner would have no idea.
That is the crux of it. The mechanics of the panopticon internalize the surveillance. Because the inmate can never know if they're being observed, they have to act as if they're being watched 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Wow, so the subjects discipline themselves.
Exactly. The physical, violent presence of a guard with a baton becomes almost irrelevant. The architectural design itself does the heavy lifting of subjugation. The prisoner becomes their own warden.
What's fascinating here is Foucault's theme regarding the relationship between knowledge and power.
Right.
The observer in the tower can see everything but remain unseen. Therefore, they have a total monopoly on knowledge. They know the intimate details of what every inmate is doing, but the inmates know absolutely nothing about the observer.
Yes.
And that asymmetry of knowledge is the purest form of power.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Foucault points out that this panoptic setup fundamentally changes the nature of punishment. In the old days, the king tortured the body to extract a confession or exact revenge.
Spectacle again.
Right. But the panopticon shifts the focus from punishing the body to manipulating the soul or the psychology of the inmate.
Oh, wow.
It strips the individual of their unique humanity by reducing them to a silhouette in a numbered cell. But simultaneously, it hyper-individualizes them by turning them into a documented case study.
And if we pull this concept out of the 18th century penal system and drop it squarely into the modern corporate office, I mean, the parallels aren't just similar, they are staggering.
They really are.
Think about the modern open plan office.
It is perhaps the most classic modern interpretation of the panopticon.
Right. And think about how it was sold to us. The open plan office was pitched by management as this great flattening of the corporate hierarchy. We are tearing down the cubicle walls. It's going to foster organic collaboration and transparency.
Yes, that was the pitch.
But functionally, structurally, what is it? It's a space where everyone can see everyone else at all times. There is nowhere to hide. Your computer screen is visible to whoever walks by.
Right.
Your coffee breaks are timed by the collective gaze. You don't know exactly when the CEO or your direct manager is going to walk behind your desk, so you police your own productivity. You stay on the spreadsheet.
Or think about the management philosophy of management by walking around, which was a huge celebrated trend in the 80s and 90s.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
The stated goal was approachability, but the actual mechanism is canoptic. The goal isn't necessarily for the manager to catch a mistake in real time. It's to create an atmosphere of constant potential visibility.
And we don't even need physical architecture to do this anymore. Today, managers have employee monitoring software.
Yes, the digital panopticon.
Programs that literally take screenshots of a remote worker's laptop every 10 minutes, or track their keystrokes per hour, or monitor if their mouse has been idle for too long. It is panopticism perfectly digitized.
And it relies on the exact same psychological trick. The remote employee knows the monitoring software is running in the background. They can't see the HR rep or the manager actually looking at the screenshots, but because the potential for observation is always there, they discipline themselves to keep the mouse moving.
But wait, I want to push back on something here, because this is where Foucault often loses people.
Okay, let's hear it.
When we talk about all this surveillance, the org charts, the open plan offices, it sounds entirely oppressive. It sounds like power is just a heavy boot stamping on a worker's neck.
Right.
But reading the text, Foucault explicitly argues that power isn't just repressive, right? It's not just about stopping bad behavior or restricting freedom.
I'm incredibly glad you brought that up, because it is arguably the most misunderstood aspect of Foucault's entire philosophy.
Okay, lay it on me.
Foucault tells us that we have to stop describing power purely in negative terms, the idea that it only excludes, represses, censors, or conceals. If power was only ever a heavy boot on a neck, people would constantly violently revolt. In fact, Foucault argues that power is productive.
Okay, productive how?
Yeah.
How is a prison guard in a tower or a tracking software on my laptop productive?
Power produces reality. It produces what Foucault calls rituals of truth and entire domains of knowledge. Let's look at the panopticon again.
Okay.
The constant observation doesn't just stop a prisoner from escaping. It generates vast amounts of data. Observers start taking notes on the prisoner's habits, their sleep cycles, their aggression.
So they study them.
Right. And that data produces entire new sciences like psychology, behavioral studies, and criminology. The surveillance produces the very concept of the delinquent.
Let me try to map that onto a modern management scenario. So you're saying that in a workplace, key performance indicators and performance metrics don't just stop employees from slacking off. They actually produce a new reality within the company.
Precisely.
By measuring specific things, say how many outbound sales calls an employee makes per day, the management is defining what productivity actually means for that specific culture. They are constructing the avatar of the ideal employee. And once that profile is produced, everyone starts measuring themselves against it. The surveillance doesn't just restrict us. It gives us the very vocabulary we use to define our own professional worth.
That is exactly it. Power builds the framework in which we understand ourselves. But if the open plan office and the factory floor are the absolute pinnacle of Foucault's disciplinary regime, we have to admit a stark reality about the modern world.
What's that?
A vast majority of us don't work in those environments anymore.
Especially post-pandemic.
Yeah.
We aren't sitting in rigid rows of desks. We are sitting on our couches in our living rooms, in sweatpants, typing on laptops over Wi-Fi.
Right.
We aren't in a physical panopticon. We aren't isolated in backlit cells being watched by a guard in a tower.
And that realization is exactly where we pivot to our second major source, Byung-Chul Han's book, Infocracy.
Okay, shifting gears.
Han argues that Foucault's disciplinary regime, the factories, the stopwatches, the traditional panopticon, those are relics of industrial capitalism. They are outdated.
Wow.
We have experienced a massive societal paradigm shift. We have moved from physical discipline into something Han argues is far more insidious, pervasive, and difficult to escape. The information regime.
The infocracy.
Yes. The fundamental shift is this. Under industrial capitalism, the institution exploited physical bodies and physical energies. They needed you to lift the box or pull the lever.
Right.
Under information capitalism, the system exploits information and data.
This is a huge shift for managers to wrap their heads around. Because in Foucault's world, isolation was the absolute key to control, right?
Completely.
You put the student at their own isolated desk, you put the prisoner in their solitary cell with walls on both sides so they can't communicate, they can't organize a union, they can't revolt.
Right.
But Han points out that in the information regime, surveillance works through the exact opposite mechanism. It doesn't want to isolate you,
Yeah.
It works through hyper-interconnection.
Right. We are no longer isolated. We are relentlessly, exhaustingly networked. And this is where Han's critique becomes really piercing. Well, in the disciplinary regime, the panopticon was a physical building. You went to the factory, you were surveilled, and then you went home and the surveillance stopped. Today, Han says, we carry a mobile panopticon in our pockets everywhere we go.
The smartphone.
The smartphone. And it's not just the phone, it's the entire ecosystem of the smart home.
Right.
Han mentions the smart bed that tracks our sleep patterns and uploads them to a server. The smart vacuum cleaner that literally uses LiDAR to map the floor plan of our private homes. We are voluntarily bringing the surveillance apparatus into our most intimate spaces.
For managers, this marks the evolution from traditional observational management to algorithmic management. Think about the difference. It's no longer about a floor boss physically watching to see if you clocked in exactly at 9:00 a.m.
Exactly.
Now it's about the algorithm silently tracking your Slack response times. It's software analyzing the sentiment of your emails over a 6-month period to see if you're a flight risk. It's tracking your digital footprint across the corporate VPN to see how long you spent on a specific intranet page.
And what is crucial to understand is that, unlike the worker in the 19th century factory, who feels the heavy, oppressive weight of the discipline and consciously hates it, the subject of the information regime largely embraces this tracking.
We like our smart devices.
We love them, which brings up an amazing literary contrast from Han's text.
Yes. The literary analogy here is perfect for framing this shift. When we talk about surveillance or dystopian workplaces, society always defaults to George Orwell's 1984. Right. Big Brother is watching you. The telescreen in your living room that you can't turn off. The thought police kicking down your door if you step out of line. It is total control through fear and pain.
Right.
But Han argues that our current corporate and societal reality looks a lot less like Orwell and a lot more like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Can you explain the mechanics of why Han makes that distinction?
It's a brilliant and honestly terrifying distinction. In Orwell's 1984, the state dominates by inflicting pain and actively suppressing human desires.
Well, it's repressive.
Highly repressive. You obey because you are terrified of Room 101. But in Huxley's Brave New World, the population isn't controlled by pain or fear. They are controlled by pleasure.
Right, they take a state-sponsored drug called Soma.
Exactly. Soma makes them perfectly happy, distracted, and compliant. They are entertained into total submission. They love their servitude.
Wow.
Han argues that the modern information regime is much closer to Huxley's vision. We aren't being forced to stare at telescreens by an authoritarian dictator. We are voluntarily, eagerly staring at touchscreens for 10 hours a day because they offer us convenience, amusement, and social validation.
So we are communicating ourselves to death voluntarily.
Yes.
Which perfectly sets up this core concept in Han's book of smart power versus repressive power. If we're constantly surveilled by our devices, by our corporate networks, by our social media algorithms, why aren't we rebelling? If we're in a panopticon, why don't we feel like prisoners?
Because of the subtle nature of smart power, repressive power, which is what Foucault mostly dealt with, commands. It gives explicit orders. It prohibits.
Like, do this or you will be fired.
Exactly. It operates with compulsion and friction. Smart power, on the other hand, operates entirely with positive incentives. It doesn't command, it nudges. It guides your behavior unconsciously.
So rather than hitting you with a stick to make you move, they just design a room where you naturally want to walk in the direction they choose.
That is a fantastic analogy. The paradox of the modern information society is that people are fundamentally imprisoned by information, by the constant exhausting need to generate and consume data, but they shackle themselves voluntarily because the process feels like freedom.
That is wild.
Domination no longer looks like domination. It presents itself as empowerment.
Han uses this incredible architectural contrast in the book to illustrate this concept, and it honestly blew my mind. He compares the Kaaba in Mecca to the Apple Store on Fifth Avenue in New York. Let's break that down.
It is a stunning visual metaphor. Han points to the Kaaba as representing the ultimate arcanum, a closed-off, impenetrable, mysterious space. Historically, only the high priest or the sovereign could enter the sacred center. It represents traditional sovereign domination, a power that is mysterious, invisible to the masses, and demands absolute submission and awe without question.
Okay, and then you contrast that heavily fortified closed space with the famous Apple Store cube in New York.
Yes.
It had a giant cube made entirely of clear glass. It is the absolute definition of total transparency. The doors are open, everyone is allowed in, it feels democratic, bright, and free. But Han argues that this glass transparency is just a different, significantly more effective form of domination.
This raises an important question. Why is the glass cube dominating? Because while the physical space is transparent and welcoming, the algorithms running the sleek devices inside that cube, which are the true source of power and wealth for the company, are completely opaque.
They are a black box.
Exactly. We surrender all our data, our locations, our private thoughts to the black box because the glass cube feels so welcoming and empowering.
And we see this dynamic playing out perfectly in how we consume media and leadership today. Han points specifically to influencers on YouTube and Instagram.
Oh, this is a fascinating dynamic. Because if you think about it, influencers do not look like traditional authorities. They don't look like a stern boss in a three-piece suit or a dictator in a military uniform.
Not at all. They film themselves in their bedrooms. They present themselves as highly authentic, creative, free individuals just living their best lives.
They do. They are worshipped as idols, lifestyle gurus, or motivational coaches. Their followers don't feel subjugated by them. They feel like they are part of a tight-knit community.
But there's a catch.
Always. Han argues that these influencers have deeply internalized the neoliberal technologies of power. They are constantly optimizing themselves, peddling travel, beauty, and productivity hacks, effectively turning their very identity into a product to be consumed. And their followers consume this content believing it's a path to their own self-realization, completely unaware that their attention, their desires, and their behavior are being algorithmically harvested and psychopolitically controlled by the platform.
Here's where it gets really interesting for the leaders and managers trying to apply this philosophy to their teams. Think about how managers actively use smart power today without even realizing it.
Right.
In a modern tech company, we don't just threaten to fire people if they don't hit their sales quota. That's repressive power, and it creates resentment. Instead, we introduced the gamification of sales targets.
Gamification is the ultimate smart power tool.
Right. Imagine a sales dashboard where every time a sales rep books a meeting, a digital gong goes off on everyone's screen and a leaderboard flashes showing who's in first place, complete with digital confetti.
They get a huge rush from that.
Exactly. The rep gets a massive dopamine hit. They want to be number one. It feels like play. It feels like a game they're choosing to win.
But structurally,
But what is actually happening mechanically? The company is extracting 20% more calls per hour from that rep without paying a higher base salary. The rep is subjugating themselves, burning themselves out, and calling it a hustle culture win.
or look at the explosion of corporate wellness initiatives. A company gives everyone on the team a free smartwatch and says, "We care about your physical and mental health. Let's do a company-wide 10,000-step challenge."
It feels like an incredible perk. It feels like the company is empowering you to be healthy.
But structurally, the company is extending its panoptic gaze directly onto your physical body. It is extracting vast amounts of biometric data from its workforce under the guise of care.
Wow.
Or consider the whole modern corporate culture mandate that demands you bring your whole self to work.
Oh, man. Bring your whole self to work. You hear that in every HR onboarding session today.
It sounds beautiful, but it is the ultimate expression of smart power. Under Foucault's disciplinary regime, the factory owner didn't give a damn about your whole self.
Right? They didn't care about your hobbies.
No, they just wanted your physical labor for 8 hours. Your soul, your hobbies, your personal traumas, that was your own business. The information regime wants your soul.
That is so creepy when you put it like that.
It wants your personality, your emotional intelligence, your social networks. By asking you to bring your whole self to work, the corporation gains access to manage, optimize, and monetize your entire identity, not just your manual labor.
Which really makes you wonder about the future of management. Is modern leadership just becoming a really good influencer to your own team?
That's a great question.
Are managers just expected to be charismatic curators of the corporate algorithm, nudging people with positive vibes and digital confetti while the software tracks their every micro movement?
That is exactly the dystopian danger Han is warning about, and it leads to a much deeper structural crisis. This abundance of data, this constant tracking and algorithmic nudging, it doesn't just change how we are watched in the office.
What else does it change?
Han argues it fundamentally breaks how we make decisions as human beings, and ultimately how we understand truth itself.
Okay, let's dive into that, because this is where the lofty philosophy hits the real world of business strategy hard. Han talks extensively about the rise of dataism.
Yes, dataism.
So dataism is that basically the assumption that if we just gather enough metrics on our employees and our markets, human judgment and intuition become totally obsolete.
That is precisely what it is. Dataism is almost a religious belief in the power of algorithms. It's the idea that everything, human behavior, market trends, even morality, can be computed.
Just feed it to the AI.
Exactly. The core tenet is that if we just have enough data, we can perfectly predict the future, optimize society, and remove any need for messy, subjective, ideological narratives. Han calls dataism totalitarianism without ideology.
Totalitarianism without ideology. Let me try to wrap my head around that. Totalitarianism usually requires a massive ideology, right? Like fascism or communism. A dictator forces you to believe a specific narrative about the world.
Right. But dataism doesn't need a narrative. Dataism just points to a dashboard and says, the data is the truth. We don't need a political philosophy. We don't need a corporate mission statement. The numbers speak for themselves.
Wow.
It claims to provide a second, deeper, more objective reality behind the messy world we actually experience.
But wait, I have to challenge this premise because I can hear the MBAs listening screaming at their phones right now. Isn't data inherently objective? I mean, 2 plus 2 is 4.
Right, sure.
If a manager relies on a big data set to see that team productivity severely dips at 3 p.m. on Fridays, why is relying on that metric considered a threat to rational thought? Shouldn't we want data-driven management over managers just going with their gut feeling?
It's a completely valid pushback, and to answer it, we have to look at the mechanics of rationality through a philosopher Quively. Han references heavily Jürgen Habermas and his theory of communicative action.
Okay, break down communicative action for us.
Habermas argues that true rationality, the ability to make sound, ethical, effective decisions, requires a very specific kind of human discourse. It requires time.
Time to think.
Right. It requires narration. It requires people coming together in a public sphere or a boardroom, offering arguments, listening to counter-arguments, and actively considering the standpoints of others who are fundamentally different from them.
So it's an active dialogue.
Yes, you have to qualify your statements. You have to be willing to be proven wrong by a better argument. That slow, methodical process is communicative action.
So communicative action is like a 3-hour intense strategic planning meeting where the executive team debates the ethics and long-term fallout of closing a factory. People are arguing, looking at nuance, understanding the human cost.
Exactly.
And what does the information regime do to that process?
It absolutely destroys it. The information regime is characterized by accelerated, fragmented communication. Tweets, short videos, rapid-fire Slack threads, executive summary dashboards.
Because it's all about speed.
Right. This temporal architecture, this obsession with speed, is fundamentally incompatible with rationality. Rationality is time-intensive. You simply cannot have a nuanced, empathy-driven debate about corporate ethics in a series of 280-character bursts or a fast-scrolling chat feed.
I see. Because algorithms optimize for engagement and speed. They don't optimize for truth or deep understanding.
Exactly. When communication moves that fast, cognitive practices like knowledge, deep experience, and long-term insight get pushed aside because they're too slow.
So what takes their place?
Effective communication. Pure emotion. The algorithm doesn't care if an argument is logically sound. It cares if it triggers an immediate visceral response, usually outrage or anxiety that keeps you clicking.
Oh.
So back to your question about data-driven management. Yes, the data point that productivity drops at 3 p.m. on Friday is technically objective. But if a CEO relies solely on an algorithmic dashboard to make a decision, say, the algorithm recommends firing the bottom 10% of performers because it's mathematically optimal for quarterly profits. They bypass the slow, rational discourse needed to find out why productivity dropped.
They lose the human context entirely. They didn't do the communicative action to discover that the bottom 10% are actually the mentors holding the team culture together.
Precisely. They lose the communicative action required to build consensus, empathy, and long-term ethical frameworks. Purely data-driven management has zero capacity for the moral or social implications of its actions. It just executes the math.
And Hahn points out how this obsession with data gets weaponized against individuals with something called psychometrics, right? Let's get into the mechanics of that.
Psychometrics is a highly advanced, data-driven method for establishing a deeply accurate personality profile based entirely on your digital behavior. It's the reality that by analyzing your likes, your clicks, your purchase history, and even your scrolling speed over a piece of content, an algorithm can predict your emotional triggers and behavior better than your own spouse could.
Which is what creates the infamous filter bubble.
Yes.
Let's map the filter bubble onto a corporate environment. Because usually we talk about filter bubbles in terms of social media, but think about a toxic yes-men culture surrounding a CEO.
Oh, that's a brilliant comparison.
If a CEO only surrounds themselves with people who agree with them, the company eventually drives off a cliff because no one warned the leader about the reality of the market. The algorithm acts as the ultimate corporate sycophant.
That is a perfect translation because the algorithm knows exactly what triggers you and what worldviews you already agree with. It feeds you a continuous, comfortable stream of information that perfectly conforms to your existing convictions.
So it's an echo chamber.
It creates an impenetrable echo chamber. And more dangerously, it completely expels the other. You are never confronted with a viewpoint or a piece of data that challenges you.
But if everyone in society or everyone in a massive corporation is living in their own customized, algorithmically generated reality, how does a team even agree on basic facts anymore?
They don't.
It sounds like a recipe for collective delusion. Which brings us to the political and social fallout of this infocracy, the crisis of truth.
And this is where Hahn's critique gets incredibly sharp, because he looks at how these exact mechanisms operate on a geopolitical scale.
Now, quick note for our listeners before we dive into this specific part of text. Hahn uses some very specific, highly charged political examples from recent history to illustrate his philosophical points.
Yes.
Our job on this deep dive is to objectively relay the author's analysis of how the mechanics of the information machine work without taking any political sides ourselves. We're looking at the engine of the car, regardless of who is in the driver's seat.
A vital disclaimer. Hahn explicitly uses the 2016 U.S. presidential election, the Donald Trump campaign, and the data firm Cambridge Analytica as his primary clinical examples of how an information war is fought in a modern infocracy.
Okay, so let's break down the mechanics. How exactly did Cambridge Analytica use psychometrics? What was the actual mechanism of action?
Hahn argues that the campaign utilized psychometrics for a tactic called micro-targeting. Historically, a political campaign had to offer a broad, relatively coherent narrative to the entire country. Everyone saw the same TV ads.
Right, the mass media approach.
But with psychometrics, voters were segmented into thousands of hyper-specific psychological profiles. The campaign then deployed dark ads.
Dark ads meaning ads that only specific people can see on their feeds.
Right. They generated thousands of variations of an advertisement, and each specific variation was optimized by an algorithm to trigger a specific emotional response, like fear or anger, in a specific fragmented group of people.
So they weren't broadcasting, they were narrowly manipulating.
Exactly. So some voters in a state saw one message, while their neighbors next door saw a completely contradictory message, and neither knew what the other was seeing.
So the public sphere, the shared Habermasian space where everyone debates the same set of facts, just fractures completely.
Exactly. Citizens aren't participating in a shared democratic discourse anymore. They're being individually, precisely manipulated at a pre-reflexive emotional level.
Wow.
And in this fragmented environment, Hahn argues, the traditional philosophical concept of truth loses its structural power. He actually references the comedian Stephen Colbert's famous term, truthiness.
Oh, truthiness. I remember that.
Yeah.
The idea that something feels true in your gut or aligns with your tribal identity, regardless of what the actual verifiable facts are.
Right. In an infocracy, effective emotional communication will always beat a rational, fact-based argument.
Because emotion is faster.
Exactly. Fake news spreads like a virus, not because people are stupid, but because a single sensational tweet containing a decontextualized fragment of fake information is simply faster, more frictionless, and more emotionally engaging than a slow, heavily reasoned 5,000-word factual article.
The truth is often boring, nuanced, and complicated. Fake news is exciting, clear, and infinitely shareable.
Hahn compares this modern crisis of truth to older totalitarian models, bringing George Orwell and the philosopher Hannah Arendt back into the mix.
Right, so mechanically, how does truth die in an infocracy versus how it died in the 20th century?
It's a shift in tactics. In Orwell's 1984, you have the Ministry of Truth. The dictator actively erases history, burns books, and forces a specific lie down everyone's throat. Truth is destroyed by physical coercion and censorship.
Okay, but in an infocracy.
In an infocracy, truth isn't dictated by a tyrant, it is simply drowned out.
Drowned out by the sheer volume of noise.
Exactly, by a tsunami of fragmented information. To explain this, Hahn brings in the philosopher Harry Frankfurt's concept of the bullshitter.
Let's unpack the difference between a liar and a bullshitter, because I think this is vital for understanding modern communication.
According to Frankfurt, a liar is someone who knows exactly what the truth is and actively, consciously tries to hide it or subvert it.
Ironically, a liar still respects the concept of truth enough to fight a war against it.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. But a bullshitter is entirely blind to the truth. They do not care if what they are saying is true or false. They only care about the effect their words have in the moment. They only care about engagement, persuasion, or looking good.
So Hahn is arguing that the infocracy fundamentally breeds this kind of bullshit communication.
Yes.
It's not that society is being fed one big centralized lie by a dictator. It's that we are overwhelmed by so much fragmented, algorithmically boosted noise that the very distinction between truth and fiction blurs into total irrelevance. Society just disintegrates into digital tribalism.
Precisely.
So let's bring this massive geopolitical concept back down to the managers and leaders listening right now. Imagine trying to manage a corporate team in a post-truth, hyper-polarized environment.
It's a nightmare scenario.
It really is.
Oh.
This frenzy of communication and this digital tribalism doesn't just stay neatly contained on Twitter or TikTok. It leaks directly into the corporate culture. Think about corporate truthiness.
Give me an example.
Imagine an employee spreads an unverified rumor on an anonymous, company-wide Slack channel that mass layoffs are coming tomorrow. The rumor confirms people's baseline anxiety, so it goes viral internally in minutes.
And how does management respond?
Exactly. The executive team scrambles and puts out a 20-page, highly rational, data-backed memo proving that the company is financially stable and no layoffs are planned. But it doesn't matter.
Because the rational memo is too slow, too boring.
Right. The viral rumor had truthiness. It felt true. The team's trust is fractured, and the carefully planned rational strategy of the company is derailed by a fragment of noise.
If your employees are conditioned by their devices 247 to exist in filter bubbles, to respond only to emotional triggers, and to view anyone with a different opinion as a tribal enemy, how do you ever build consensus in a strategic meeting? How do you implement a new, difficult operational strategy?
It becomes nearly impossible. If leaders don't actively, fiercely protect space and time for slow, rational discourse, if a company relies entirely on rapid-fire Slack channels, anonymous feedback apps, and reactive data dashboards, they are just recreating the toxic infocracy inside their own walls.
Right. They are actively destroying the time and space required for Habermas's communicative action.
Which brings us to a rather bleak, paralyzing juncture in our deep dive. If we are truly living in a digital panopticon, constantly nudged by opaque algorithms where truth is rapidly eroding into tribalism and bullshit, are we just trapped in the matrix?
It feels like it.
Is the modern manager and the modern employee totally helpless against this architecture of power?
And thankfully, for the sake of our sanity, the answer is no. Which is exactly why we need to bring in our third and final source, John Gaventa and Jethro Pettit's brilliant synthesis on Foucault's work.
Right, because Foucault often gets a bad rap.
He does. Foucault is very often accused by his critics of being a deep pessimist, a fatalist who just describes how we are trapped. But this text argues he wasn't a fatalist at all. His core belief was that wherever there is power, there is always inherently resistance.
Yes, this shift in perspective is crucial. Gaventa and Petit highlight that Foucault believed power is not a physical object you can hold in your hand.
Right. It's not a baton.
It is not just a tool of coercion held exclusively by a CEO, a government, or a sovereign. Power, Foucault insisted, is everywhere and comes from everywhere. It is a complex, dynamic web of relations that pervades every level of society.
And they talk extensively about how this web of power creates these regimes of truth.
Let's define that clearly. What exactly is a regime of truth?
A regime of truth is the set of rules in a society or in a specific organization by which true and false are separated. It is the types of discourse that an institution accepts and makes function as true.
Okay, give me some context on that.
Well, it dictates who gets the authority to speak, what counts as valid knowledge, and how that knowledge is sanctioned or punished.
So, mapping this to a corporate setting, a regime of truth might be the deeply held belief that maximizing shareholder value is the ultimate moral good of the company.
Yes.
Or the belief that quantitative data is always superior to qualitative human feedback. Those aren't absolute laws of physics. They aren't handed down by God. They are rules created and maintained by the corporate power structure.
Exactly. They are constructed truths. And because Foucault locates power firmly in discourse in the very language we use, the knowledge we accept as given, the norms we normalize discourse also becomes the primary site of resistance.
Oh, wow.
We aren't fighting a guy with a gun in a watchtower anymore. We are navigating a web of accepted truths, and we can evade, subvert, or contest those strategies of power by actively changing the discourse.
The text mentions a very specific practical application for this resistance, which they call discourse analysis.
Yes, discourse analysis.
It notes that NGOs, sociologists, and activists use this tool to examine normative language. They look at mission statements and program aims to expose the hidden power dynamics underneath. I want to do a live exercise here to show the managers listening exactly how this works.
Let's do it.
Let's take a very standard, generic corporate mission statement. Say a company's stated goal is, we maximize shareholder value through relentless innovation and optimizing human capital. If we apply discourse analysis to that, how do we tear it apart?
It's a great exercise. You start by asking, who is this language actually serving, and what massive assumptions are baked into these seemingly innocent corporate buzzwords?
Okay, let's start with human capital.
Let's look at the phrase optimizing human capital. On the surface, in the regime of truth of a boardroom, that sounds like efficient management. But through discourse analysis, we see that it fundamentally equates human beings with all their messy emotions, needs, and communicative action to machinery. Capital is something to be spent, depreciated, and discarded.
Right. And what about relentless innovation? That implies that speed and constant change are inherently good. It leaves absolutely no room for stability, for rest, or for the slow rationality of Habermas's communicative action.
Relentless literally means without pity or without stopping.
Exactly. So by accepting that mission statement, the employees are unconsciously agreeing to a regime of truth where burnout is standard operating procedure.
Precisely. By identifying the normative language, you expose the power dynamic. The power isn't hidden in a secret memo. It's right there in the mission statement painted on the lobby wall.
And once you expose it,
Once you expose it, you can shape alternative framings and challenge the embedded power. You can change the vocabulary of the company.
so what does this all mean for the manager or the aspiring leader listening today?
It means a fundamental shift in how you view your role. It means understanding that you don't hold power over your team just because you have a fancy title or control the payroll. You shape the discourse. The specific words you use in a one-on-one, the metrics you choose to value on a dashboard, the behaviors you reward or ignore these, all actively construct the regime of truth in your specific office.
This is the ultimate actionable toolkit for the modern manager. You can use discourse analysis on your own company starting tomorrow morning. Look closely at your KPIs. Look at your meeting agendas. Look at the corporate buzzwords everyone repeats on Slack without thinking.
Ask the hard questions.
Ask yourself the hard questions. Are these tools inadvertently creating an oppressive regime of truth? Are you relying so heavily on smart power, gamification, and algorithmic nudges that you are secretly treating your employees like Foucault's docile bodies to be optimized, rather than humans capable of rational discourse?
Right.
Every single meeting agenda you write is a tiny node of power. It can either trap your people deeper in the infocracy, or it can empower them to think critically and push back.
Recognizing that power is everywhere is not a reason to despair. It means recognizing your own profound agency in shaping that power on a micro level every single day you walk into the office or log on to a call.
Let's bring this all together because we have gone on quite a profound journey today. We started in the 18th century with Foucault, showing us how the industrial age broke messy humans down into docile bodies, regimented by strict timetables and observed from the terrifying architecture of the panopticon.
We saw how that laid the literal blueprint for org charts, the 9 to 5, and performance reviews.
Then we followed Byung-Chul Han into the modern era, where the physical panopticon was replaced by the digital, frictionless infocracy. We saw how repressive, violent power gave way to smart power, where we voluntarily surveil ourselves through smartphones and smart homes.
We explored the deep danger of trading our slow, rational discourse and shared truth for the speed of algorithms, gamification, and convenience.
And finally, we looked at how to actually navigate this overwhelming matrix through Gaventa and Pettit's lens. Realizing that power lives in language and discourse gives us the practical tool of discourse analysis to challenge those hidden structures, starting with our own corporate mission statements.
For the managers, leaders, and students listening, the call to action here is immense. You are the architects of the modern workplace.
You really are.
You are the ones designing the operational systems, choosing the monitoring software, and setting the cultural norms. You have to actively decide if you are building a transparent but dominating glass cube panopticon or a space that genuinely fosters slow, messy, communicative action.
And that leads to one final provocative thought to leave you with as you head back to work. We opened by talking about the blueprints of workplace management, comparing them to architectural schematics. As AI, predictive algorithmic management, and this relentless infocracy become the undeniable baseline of all corporate life. Will the true luxury of the future workplace not be having the fastest technology or the sleekest dashboards or the most massive data sets?
I wonder.
Will the ultimate luxury, the ultimate sign of a truly elite and healthy organization, simply be the permission to be disconnected, the protected space to be inefficient, unoptimized, and profoundly messily human?
It is a question worth keeping at the very front of your mind the next time you look at a red or green arrow on a performance dashboard.
Something to seriously mull over. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.